The Korean Mafia boss collapsed in her restaurant. What she did next shocked everyone. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day and that good fortune follows you wherever you are. Before we dive into today's unforgettable story, may I borrow just 5 seconds of your luck? Please help this channel grow by subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss another emotional journey like this one. Thank you so much for your continued support and for being part of this amazing community. It truly means more than you know. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it where you are right now? Grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's begin the incredible story that changed 2 lives forever. Some people walk into your life for a reason. Others collapse into it, and nothing is ever the same again. Rain had been drumming against the front windows of Carter's table for nearly 2 hours, turning the quiet street outside into a river of shimmering reflections beneath the streetlights. Wednesday evenings were usually slow, and by 9:40 p.m. only 3 customers remained, lingering over coffee while soft jazz drifted through the dining room. I wiped down the polished oak counter for what felt like the 10th time that night, breathing in the comforting aroma of garlic, fresh rosemary, and warm sourdough that still floated from the kitchen. My name is Olivia Carter, and at 29 years old, owning this little restaurant on the edge of downtown Chicago had been the hardest dream I had ever fought to keep alive. Every chair, every framed photograph on the brick walls, every handmade dessert on the menu represented years of double shifts, rejected bank loans, and promises I had made to my late mother that I refused to break. The restaurant wasn't just my business. It was my home, my family, and the one place where people from every background could sit together for an hour and forget how heavy life could be. I was carrying a tray of fresh coffee toward an elderly couple near the window when the front door opened. A cold gust of rain swept inside before the door eased shut behind a tall man dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. At first glance, he looked like any successful businessman finishing a long day, but something about him immediately felt different. His shoulders were impossibly broad beneath the soaked jacket. Dark hair, damp from the rain, was brushed carelessly away from a striking face that seemed carved from stone. Even from 20 feet away, I noticed the colorful ink disappearing beneath the open collar of his white dress shirt, intricate tattoos climbing along the side of his neck before vanishing beneath expensive fabric. He paused just inside the entrance, scanning the dining room with calm gray eyes that somehow looked both alert and impossibly tired. For one strange second, our eyes met. There was no smile, no greeting, just an exhausted silence that felt far older than the man standing before me. I stepped toward him with the same warm smile I offered every guest. "Welcome. Table for 1, I asked gently. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to answer, but no words came out. Instead, his hand reached toward the nearest chair. His fingers trembled almost imperceptibly. The color slowly disappeared from his face. My smile faded. Every instinct I had sharpened after years of running a restaurant told me something was terribly wrong. He took one more step, then another. The entire dining room seemed to hold its breath as his knees suddenly gave way. Before anyone could react, the mysterious stranger collapsed onto the hardwood floor only a few feet from where I stood, and in that exact moment, none of us realized that the man lying in my restaurant was Kang Min-jae, the most feared Korean Mafia boss in America, and that someone outside was already searching for him. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. The coffee pot slipped from my hand and landed harmlessly on the rubber floor mat behind the counter, but the sharp sound snapped me back to reality. I rushed across the dining room and dropped to my knees beside him before anyone else reacted. The elderly couple stood frozen near the window. One of my servers whispered my name with obvious panic, asking if she should call an ambulance. "Call 911 now," I answered without taking my eyes off the stranger. Years before opening the restaurant, I had completed emergency response training because my mother always believed every business owner should know how to help when seconds mattered. I gently turned him onto his back and checked his breathing. It was shallow but steady. His pulse was present, though much weaker than I expected for a man with such a powerful build. Rainwater soaked through the expensive fabric of his jacket as I loosened his collar to help him breathe more comfortably. That was when I noticed the tattoos more clearly. Black ink stretched across his collarbone in elegant Korean lettering, disappearing beneath his shirt like pieces of a story I could not read. They were not reckless or chaotic. They looked deliberate, almost artistic. His skin felt unusually cool beneath my fingertips. "Sir, can you hear me?" I asked softly. There was no response, only the faint rise and fall of his chest. I reached for the first aid kit beneath the hostess stand while my waitress, Emily, hurried over with clean towels. "Is he going to be all right?" she whispered. "I do not know yet," I admitted, pressing a folded towel beneath his head. "But we are going to do everything we can." The dining room had become strangely quiet. Even the jazz music seemed distant beneath the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the windows. I noticed something else then. His hands. They were rougher than I expected, marked by old scars that had long since healed. Yet resting beside him was a watch worth more than my monthly rent. Nothing about him fit together. Success and hardship, elegance and mystery. Before I could think any further, he stirred. His eyelids fluttered for only a second before closing again. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but exhaustion stole whatever words had been waiting there. "Stay with me," I whispered instinctively. "Help is coming." Outside, headlights swept across the front windows. One black sport utility vehicle rolled slowly past the restaurant without stopping. Then another. Their dark windows revealed nothing, yet an uneasy feeling settled deep inside my chest. They were moving far too slowly for ordinary traffic on a rainy night. Emily followed my gaze toward the street. "Do you know them?" she asked quietly. I shook my head, but something told me this was not a coincidence. The stranger's breathing became steadier after several long moments, and relief washed over me. Then his hand suddenly closed around my wrist with surprising strength. His eyes opened only halfway, clouded with fatigue but intensely focused. His voice was barely louder than a whisper, carrying the faint trace of a Korean accent. "Please," he said, "do not let them take me." Before I could ask who he meant, his grip loosened. His eyes closed once more, and the flashing lights of the approaching ambulance reflected across the rain-covered windows, while the black vehicles outside quietly disappeared into the darkness. The ambulance arrived in less than 6 minutes, yet the strange calm surrounding the man never left the room. 2 paramedics hurried inside carrying their equipment while rainwater streamed from their jackets onto my hardwood floor. I stepped aside only long enough to answer their questions. "Male, approximately mid-30s, I said. Collapsed a few minutes after walking in. Weak pulse at first, shallow breathing, briefly regained consciousness, then lost awareness again." One of the paramedics nodded with quiet approval. "You kept him stable. That probably made a difference." I exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. They carefully transferred him onto a stretcher while attaching monitoring equipment. His breathing had improved, but his face remained unusually pale beneath the bright restaurant lights. As they prepared to leave, his hand shifted slightly, almost as if he sensed someone walking away. Without thinking, I stepped closer. His fingers relaxed again, and for reasons I could not explain, I felt relieved. "Miss?" one paramedic asked. "Did he have any identification?" I looked toward the black suit jacket that still rested over the chair where he had tried to steady himself before collapsing. I picked it up carefully and reached into the inside pocket. Instead of a wallet, I found a slim leather card holder and a simple black business card with nothing except a silver emblem embossed across the center. No company name, no address, no phone number, just an unfamiliar crest that somehow carried an unmistakable sense of authority. Tucked behind it was a passport. I opened it only far enough to confirm his identity before handing it directly to the paramedic. Kang Min-jae, Republic of Korea. The name meant absolutely nothing to me. "Family listed?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nothing else." He slipped the passport into an evidence pouch before the stretcher rolled toward the waiting ambulance. The flashing lights disappeared into the rain, leaving my restaurant strangely silent once again. Emily slowly locked the front door and leaned against it with both hands. "Olivia," she whispered, That was the weirdest thing I have ever seen. I forced a small smile, trying to believe the night was finally over. We cleaned overturned chairs, gathered scattered towels, and replaced broken dishes while soft music continued playing as though nothing unusual had happened. Nearly 40 minutes later, after the last customer had left, I switched off most of the dining room lights and carried the trash toward the back alley. The rain had almost stopped. Cool air filled my lungs as I pushed open the heavy service door. That was when I noticed them. 4 men stood across the narrow alley beside 2 black sport utility vehicles. Every one of them wore dark tailored suits despite the weather. None of them spoke. None of them looked at their phones. They simply watched the restaurant with quiet patience. The tallest among them stepped forward just enough for the alley light to reveal his face. His expression remained respectful, almost formal. "Excuse me," he said in calm English. "Are you Miss Olivia Carter?" Every instinct told me to remain cautious, but something in his voice lacked hostility. I nodded slowly without moving any closer. He lowered his head in a polite bow before speaking again. "Thank you for saving our chairman tonight." Before I could ask what he meant, more headlights turned into the alley behind them, and every man immediately straightened as though preparing to welcome someone whose arrival required absolute respect. The words echoed in my mind long after the man finished speaking. Our chairman. The title sounded formal, almost old-fashioned, but the respect in every face standing before me made it clear this was no ordinary executive. I tightened my grip on the trash bag, unsure whether I should answer or simply walk back inside. "I only did what anyone would have done," I said quietly. The tall man offered a faint smile that never quite reached his eyes. "With respect, Miss Carter, not everyone would have stayed." Before I could respond, the rear passenger door of the newest sport utility vehicle opened. Another man stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat despite the damp evening air. He appeared to be in his early 60s, silver hair neatly combed, posture perfectly straight. He walked toward me with measured confidence before stopping several feet away. Instead of offering a handshake, he bowed politely. "My name is Mr. Han," he said. "I have served Chairman Kong for many years." His voice carried neither arrogance nor intimidation, only quiet gratitude. "The doctors informed us that your quick actions prevented his condition from becoming much worse. Our family will never forget your kindness." Family. That single word caught my attention. Until then, I had assumed these men worked for a corporation or perhaps a private security company. Yet the way they referred to Kong Min-jae sounded far more personal than professional. Mr. Han reached inside his coat and carefully removed a cream-colored envelope sealed with black wax. He extended it toward me with both hands. "Please accept this as a small expression of appreciation." I did not even need to open it. The weight alone suggested there was far more money inside than I had seen in months. Rent was due in 12 days. The refrigerator in the kitchen had been making strange noises for weeks. My oldest oven needed repairs I had continued postponing. Every practical thought urged me to take the envelope. Instead, I gently folded Mr. Han's fingers back around it. "I cannot accept this," I said. Genuine surprise crossed several faces behind him. Mr. Han blinked twice before asking softly, "May I ask why?" I looked back through the restaurant window where the warm lights still glowed against the rainy night. "Because saving someone is not a service with a price. If your chairman had walked into my restaurant hungry, I would have served him dinner. Tonight he needed help instead." Silence settled over the alley. Even the distant traffic seemed to fade for a moment. Mr. Han lowered his head once more, this time more deeply than before. "He was correct," he murmured almost to himself. "He said you would refuse." My eyebrows lifted in surprise. "He is awake?" Mr. Han nodded. Only briefly. Before resting again, he gave exactly one instruction. My heartbeat quickened without explanation. "What instruction?" The older man smiled gently. "He asked us to protect this restaurant until he could thank you personally." I stared at him, convinced I had misunderstood. "That is not necessary," I replied quickly. "Nothing happened here." Mr. Han glanced toward the quiet street before returning his calm gaze to mine. Miss Carter, he said carefully. Chairman Kong has spent his entire life recognizing dangers long before others notice them. If he believes you should not be left alone tonight, then we intend to honor his wishes. As if to confirm his words, 2 more black vehicles quietly positioned themselves at opposite ends of the block, their headlights dimmed, while my small neighborhood restaurant suddenly became the safest building on the entire street. The next morning, I almost convinced myself the entire night had been a dream. Sunlight poured through the front windows of Carter's table, painting warm golden rectangles across the hardwood floor, while the scent of fresh cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen. The neighborhood returned to its familiar rhythm. Office workers hurried toward the train station with paper coffee cups in their hands. Parents walked children to school. Delivery trucks rolled past every few minutes. Everything looked ordinary again, yet something inside me refused to believe the strange chapter had truly ended. Emily arrived 20 minutes before opening and immediately glanced through the front window. "The black vehicles are gone," she said with a relieved smile. I nodded without answering. Somehow their absence felt almost as noticeable as their presence had been. We unlocked the doors at 10 o'clock sharp, and customers soon filled the dining room with cheerful conversations and the comforting clatter of silverware against ceramic plates. By lunchtime, every table was occupied. I finally allowed myself to relax. Maybe Chairman Kong had already forgotten about the small restaurant where a stranger happened to help him. Maybe that was for the best. Around 1:30 that afternoon, a delivery truck stopped outside. I frowned. We had not ordered supplies for another 3 days. A young driver stepped inside carrying an enormous arrangement of white lilies and ivory roses unlike anything I had ever seen. The flowers looked elegant without being extravagant, tied together with a simple black ribbon. "Delivery for Miss Olivia Carter," he announced with a smile. Every customer nearby looked up curiously as he placed the arrangement on the front counter. Emily hurried over first. "Who are they from?" she asked excitedly. The driver handed me a small cream-colored envelope before leaving as quickly as he had arrived. I carefully opened the card. There were only 2 handwritten lines in neat black ink. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. Kong Min-jae." No company logo, no title, no dramatic message. Just a simple expression of gratitude. I smiled despite myself. Before I could put the card away, another delivery truck pulled to the curb. Then another. Emily stared through the glass with widening eyes. "Olivia, I think those are coming here too." Within 30 minutes our restaurant had received fresh produce from a local organic farm, premium coffee beans from a specialty roaster, artisan cheeses, imported olive oil, and enough baking ingredients to supply us for weeks. Every invoice listed the amount due as $0. Every shipment carried the same short instruction: paid in full. I immediately reached for the telephone number on one of the delivery forms, determined to stop whatever misunderstanding had occurred. The supplier answered cheerfully. "Miss Carter, your account has already been taken care of by Chairman Kang's office. Congratulations." "There has been a mistake," I insisted. "Please send everything back." The manager laughed politely. "I am sorry, but our customer specifically instructed us that nothing should inconvenience you." I ended the call with a sigh and looked around the restaurant. Emily stood beside the flower arrangement, shaking her head in disbelief. I have never seen anyone say thank you like this. Neither had I. Late that afternoon, as I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, I noticed a familiar black sport utility vehicle parked quietly across the street. It did not block traffic. It did not attract attention. It simply waited there beneath the shade of a large maple tree. Behind the windshield sat Mr. Han. When our eyes met, he offered a respectful nod before returning to the newspaper resting in his hands, as though watching over my little restaurant had become the most natural responsibility in the world. 3 days passed before I saw Kong Min-jae again. By then, the restaurant had settled back into its familiar rhythm, yet a quiet routine had begun to form outside that no one could ignore. Every morning, one black sport utility vehicle appeared across the street shortly before we opened. Every evening, it disappeared only after I locked the front door. The men inside never entered, never disturbed anyone, and never spoke unless spoken to. They simply watched with calm patience that somehow felt more reassuring than unsettling. Emily had stopped asking questions by the second day. "I think they are the most polite security team in Chicago," she joked one afternoon as she refilled sugar jars. I laughed softly, although I still intended to speak with Chairman Kong the first chance I had. Late Friday evening, the dinner rush finally slowed. Soft piano music floated through the nearly empty dining room, while golden light reflected off polished glasses and neatly arranged silverware. I was placing a fresh slice of apple pie on a dessert plate when the front door opened. This time I recognized him immediately. Kong Min-jae walked inside without an entourage, wearing a charcoal sweater beneath a dark overcoat instead of the expensive suit I remembered. He looked healthier, though faint traces of exhaustion still lingered beneath his calm gray eyes. The colorful tattoos along his neck disappeared beneath the collar of his sweater, visible only for a brief moment before he adjusted it. The entire restaurant seemed to grow quieter, not because anyone recognized him, but because he carried a quiet confidence that naturally drew attention. He paused near the entrance until our eyes met. Then, to my surprise, he offered a small respectful bow before walking toward the table beside the window where he had almost collapsed only days earlier. "Good evening," I said as I approached with a menu. "How are you feeling?" A faint smile appeared, subtle enough that someone looking away might have missed it. "Much better," he replied. "Thanks to you." His English remained careful and measured, touched by a gentle Korean accent that somehow softened his otherwise commanding presence. I placed the menu in front of him. "I am glad you recovered." He looked down at the menu only briefly before closing it again. "May I ask you something first?" I nodded. "Why did you refuse my gifts?" I folded my hands in front of my apron. "Because kindness is not supposed to create debt." He studied my face for several quiet seconds. Most people would have found the silence uncomfortable. Somehow I did not. Finally, he nodded slowly. "In my world," he said, "every favor carries a price." I smiled gently. "Then maybe you needed to spend more time outside your world." For the first time since entering the restaurant, he laughed. It was quiet and genuine, transforming his entire expression. The tension seemed to disappear from his shoulders as though he had forgotten how to relax until that very moment. "Perhaps," he admitted. "Then let me do one thing correctly tonight." He pointed toward the dessert display behind the counter. "Recommend your favorite meal. No special treatment. No expensive ingredients. Just the dinner you would serve someone you wanted to welcome." I could not explain why those words touched me so deeply. I simply nodded and headed toward the kitchen. As I glanced back through the service window a few minutes later, I noticed Kong Min-jae sitting alone, looking out at the rainy Chicago street with a peaceful expression that made him seem less like a feared leader and more like a lonely man who had finally found one quiet place where no one expected anything from him. The weeks that followed changed the rhythm of my life in ways I never expected. Every Friday evening, just as the dinner crowd began to thin, the front door opened at exactly the same time. Kong Min-jae always arrived alone, greeted everyone with a polite nod, and quietly took the table beside the window without waiting to be seated. He never requested special treatment. He always ordered whatever I recommended that day, and before leaving, he thanked every employee who happened to cross his path. My regular customers began recognizing him as the quiet gentleman who enjoyed homemade food more than expensive restaurants. None of them realized that two discreet vehicles remained parked somewhere nearby until he finished dinner. One rainy afternoon, nearly a month after the night we met, I carried a bowl of seafood chowder to his table and noticed he was reading an old paperback novel instead of looking at his phone. "I did not picture you as someone who enjoys classic American literature," I said with a smile. He carefully closed the book before answering. "There are many things people do not picture when they look at me." His words lingered in my thoughts as I poured him fresh coffee. "Including the fact that you seem happiest sitting in a neighborhood restaurant?" I asked. He looked around the dining room where families laughed together, elderly couples shared pie, and a little boy proudly showed his mother a drawing he had colored while waiting for dinner. A warmth settled across his normally reserved expression. "Especially that," he answered quietly. In places like this, people smile without expecting anything in return. I leaned against the opposite chair for just a moment. You sound surprised. He looked down at the coffee cup between his hands. Where I come from, trust is rare. Peace is temporary. Every room requires attention. Every conversation has another meaning hidden beneath it. His gray eyes slowly lifted toward mine. This is the only place where I forget to look over my shoulder. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I realized then that the powerful man everyone seemed determined to protect carried a loneliness deeper than exhaustion. Before I could answer, the restaurant door opened again. A young mother hurried inside carrying a frightened little girl no older than 6. The child had tears running down her cheeks after tripping outside and scraping her knee on the sidewalk. Without hesitation, I excused myself and knelt beside the little girl with a clean towel and first aid supplies. "You are going to be all right," I whispered. "May I help you?" The little girl nodded bravely. Within minutes she stopped crying as I gently cleaned the scrape and covered it with a colorful bandage shaped like a smiling star. "There," I said. "Now you have the bravest knee in Chicago." She giggled before hugging her mother. When I returned to Kong Min-jae's table, I noticed he had not touched his coffee. Instead, he had quietly watched the entire exchange. "You speak to everyone the same way," he said softly, "whether they are a frightened child or a stranger who collapsed in your restaurant." I shrugged with an embarrassed smile. People usually remember how someone made them feel long after they forget what was said. He remained silent for a long moment before speaking almost to himself. "No one has spoken to me like that in many years." Outside, the evening sky darkened as gentle rain began falling once more, and although neither of us knew it yet, someone sitting inside a parked sedan farther down the street had already started taking photographs of the restaurant, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to learn why the most protected man in the city kept returning to the same small place every single week. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the maple trees outside Carter's table with shades of amber and gold, and somehow our Friday dinners became an unspoken tradition neither of us ever questioned. Kong Min-jae still arrived without announcement, still chose the same seat beside the window, and still trusted me to decide what he would eat. It became our silent agreement. Cooked. He rested. For 1 hour each week, the weight he carried seemed to disappear. One Friday evening, after the last family had finished dessert and the dining room had grown peaceful again, I carried a bowl of homemade beef stew to his table. He looked at it for a long moment before smiling faintly. "This was my mother's favorite," he said. I blinked in surprise. "Really?" He nodded. "She believed simple meals tasted better when someone cared about the people eating them." His voice softened with every word. "I have not thought about that in years." I sat across from him for the first time instead of immediately returning to the kitchen. Then maybe memories have a way of finding us when we finally slow down. He looked at me with quiet curiosity. "You always know what to say." I laughed gently. "Not always. I just try to say what I would want someone to tell me." He lowered his eyes toward the table, turning the spoon slowly between his fingers. "When I was young," he said after a long silence, "my father taught me that strength meant never depending on anyone, never showing weakness, never asking for help." He paused before looking back at me. "The night I collapsed here, I broke every one of those rules." I shook my head softly. "No. You survived because you trusted someone for one moment. That is not weakness." His gaze remained fixed on mine, thoughtful and unusually vulnerable. "In my world, people respect power." I smiled warmly. "In mine, people remember kindness." The restaurant grew completely silent except for the soft melody playing through the speakers overhead. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season drifted slowly beneath the streetlights, settling across parked cars and empty sidewalks. Kong Min-jae followed my eyes toward the window before speaking again. "Olivia." It was the first time he had ever said my name. Somehow it sounded different in his gentle accent, careful and sincere. "There is something I need you to know." I waited patiently. He folded his hands together, searching for words that did not come easily. "The night you saved me." He stopped for a moment before continuing. Everyone around me believed my life was valuable because of what I controlled. You were the first person who acted as though my life mattered simply because I was another human being. I felt my chest tighten. Anyone would have helped. He slowly shook his head. No. His answer was calm but certain. Not everyone stayed. We sat together without speaking for several seconds, letting the quiet fill the space between us. Finally, I reached across the table and gently rested my hand over his for only a brief moment. It was not a romantic gesture. It was simple reassurance, the same kindness I offered every frightened customer who needed comfort. Yet the way his shoulders relaxed told me that gesture carried more meaning than either of us expected. At that very moment, Mr. Han quietly entered through the front door. He approached our table with unusual urgency, stopping just close enough to speak softly. "Chairman," he said respectfully, "there is something you should see." Kang Min-jae stood immediately. Mr. Han discreetly handed him a small envelope containing several photographs. I watched the color slowly leave his face as he studied the images. Then he looked toward me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not fear for himself. It was unmistakable concern for me. For the first time since Kang Min-jae walked into my restaurant, I saw uncertainty replace the quiet confidence that had always surrounded him. He folded the photographs back into the envelope before I could glimpse a single image, then looked at me with calm determination. "I owe you the truth," he said softly. Mr. Han stepped back, giving us privacy while the last employee quietly finished closing the kitchen. Outside, gentle snow continued to fall, wrapping the neighborhood in peaceful silence. "Someone has been trying to learn why I keep coming here," Kang admitted. "The photographs show this restaurant. They show you. They show every Friday we have shared." I felt my heartbeat quicken, yet strangely, I was not afraid. I looked at the man standing before me rather than at the envelope in his hands. "Are you asking me to close the restaurant?" He immediately shook his head. "Never. This place gave me something I thought I had lost forever." He glanced around the warm dining room with its familiar brick walls, handwritten menu board, and family photographs that decorated every corner. "Peace." I smiled gently. "Then let us protect the peace instead of running from it." He stared at me for several quiet seconds before a small smile appeared. "You make difficult things sound simple." I laughed softly. Most difficult things begin with simple choices. The following week, Mr. Han arranged for additional security around the neighborhood, but nothing about Carter's table changed. Families continued gathering every weekend. Children still colored pictures while waiting for dessert. Elderly couples lingered over coffee. The restaurant remained exactly what it had always been, a place where people felt welcome. Whatever attention had been directed toward us quietly disappeared after several uneventful weeks, and life slowly settled into a new normal. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and fresh flowers once again filled the planters outside the front windows. Every Friday evening, Kang Min-jae arrived at exactly the same time, choosing the same table by the window. He no longer looked over his shoulder before sitting down. Sometimes he read while waiting for dinner. Sometimes we talked about books, family recipes, or childhood memories. Sometimes we simply enjoyed the comfortable silence. One evening, after closing, we stood together outside the restaurant watching the city lights shimmer across the wet pavement after a brief spring rain. "Do you remember the first thing you told me?" he asked. I smiled. "I asked if you wanted a table for one." He laughed quietly. "No, after I recovered." I thought for a moment before remembering. "I said I was only doing my job." He nodded. That sentence changed my life. I looked at him with gentle curiosity. "How?" He took one slow step closer. "Because everyone else saw a chairman. You saw a person." His voice remained calm, but every word carried quiet sincerity. "You reminded me that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned through kindness." My eyes filled with unexpected tears. Before I could answer, he carefully reached for my hand, giving me every opportunity to step away. I did not. Instead, I intertwined my fingers with his. The smile that crossed his face was warmer than any I had seen before. He leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on my forehead, filled not with possession, but gratitude, trust, and hope for the future. 1 year later, Carter's table celebrated its busiest anniversary since opening. The first table beside the window remained permanently reserved every Friday evening, not because anyone had requested it, but because everyone already knew who would be sitting there. As I watched Kong Min-jae laughing with my staff over homemade apple pie, I finally understood something my mother had always believed. Some people change your life by giving you power. Others change your life simply by reminding you how to be human. He had once ruled a world built on caution. But in the end, the greatest place he ever found was a small neighborhood restaurant where kindness asked for nothing in return.